Welcome to Chapter 7, Access Control Systems Implementation. So our objectives: create guidelines and procedures based on standards and policies, identify various standards and bodies, compare various multi-layer access control, set up access control for internal and external employees, tighten security for access to the web portals such as e-commerce and banking, use best practices when implementing an access control systems, use examples of case studies to design what's going on. So our learning material, you have Chapter 7 to read in our book. I did the PowerPoints in our introduction that you're watching now. So your assignments, we have 2 assignments this week. We have the discussion question, identity as a service. So we're going to look into that. Don't forget, it is due Thursday. Your response is due Thursday night, and your to the 2 teammates, classmates, by Sunday night. You also have a lab. The lab environment, you're going to be looking at the lab instructions, and then you post it up in the lab area under the lab instructions. So the lab's going to have you looking at, I'm opening it now. So the lab is going to be having you work on it's useless. So you're going to work on the active domain controller and setting up the different areas. All right, so access control systems are an essential part of any organization, information security infrastructure, as we've been going over. But usually we have to make changes to it. So how do we identify? We want to look at identifying the implementation process. What are the different things that we can look at? How policies, procedures, guidelines all come into account. Maintain access control. So the topics, we're going to look at how to transfer access control policies and standards, identify terms of management, so what we want to do, our goals, let's see, wrong, gotta click here. Transforming access controls and policies to standard policies and standards into procedures and guidelines. So access control limits who can have, as we've been discussing, we set up who can have access to the documents, to the folders. We want to make sure we limit it to make sure that the data stays safe. So we're going to look at the physical areas such as the building, the locks, where's the server room. It's usually in the center of a building. Limiting access to personnel to make sure. An important part of any access control is creating guidelines and instructions. Who can get in, who can see the data, who has access to the servers, and these are important things. So we begin with a formal process with a plan. State your goals, what you need to reach them, how will you achieve them, determine which policies and standards you'll reference. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when other documents and resources are already existing. Determine how you can make the documentation process and system implementation easy for everyone. Come up with effective ways to do this. So what are we going to look at? Transferring policies into implementation plans. So what is a policy? The organization must ensure that all employees' own computer systems are secure. So let's go back. A standard specifies how to support it. So standards of the organization. So in this case, we're going to look at ISO 27002. The guideline, the organization recommends that passwords should be a minimum of 8 characters and a maximum of 16. Procedures. The organization should follow the steps in the password creation procedures to support the policies and standards. So one of the things we should look at is how are we going to implement it? Is this going to be big bang? You walk in Monday, everything's in, everyone's confused and upset? Probably not. One of the most a good way to do this is a phased-in approach. We start beginning looking at what is our project time. An example, assessment of the infrastructures determines the goals and sets the procedures on what we're going to be looking at. Prioritization of what we approach means that administrators are going to deal with the most important data first, and then as we get out of that, we deal with some of the other information. So these are some of the different things we want. So implementation itself, once we figured out what approach to take, we're going to look at the different implementation. What is the mission of the implementation? What is the organization trying to achieve? What are the factors needed to ensure the policy is met? So if we're looking at making sure that no one can get in, then these are the things we want. Which tools are we going to use to secure this? What method secure communications, authentication? What standards will we follow? What access control models, such as the discretionary access control, mandatory access control, the role-based access control we talked about last week? What secure protocols, if they're remote workers, which we'll talk more about later? How will the methods be implemented? Will they be put in place all at once or a phased-in approach? This is what we want to keep in mind. We have different ways to do it, and it really comes down to how important is everything and how do we get it working. Follow standards where applicable. Standards are an important baseline for incorporating security and specifically access controls within the organization. The NIST, National Vulnerability Database in the United States, the repository maintained by the government providing information on standard-based vulnerabilities, management data. The NVD uses security content automation protocols. Organizations that use the NVD are provided with that information. So one of the things we want to look at is IEEE. We talked a little bit about their standards last week on how they were set up. So a little overview of them. IEEE was created in 1963. It is a not-for-profit professional organization that has created over 1,000 information technology standards. Some of these standards is the IEEE 802, 801, and so on, which addresses the authentication layer 2 of the OSI model. Devices where communication on a network. The 802 defines the median access control, discusses the MAC. IEEE standards associated with it is the standard contributed known. So that is one method that we have. Then we have the National Institute of Technology, or NIST. It was founded in 1901 as a non-regulatory federal agency under the U.S. Department of Commerce. NIST's mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industry competitiveness by advancing measurement science standards and technologies in ways that enhance economic security. And we have the Federal Information Security Management. The Federal Security Management sets forth security requirements for all federal government agencies. It's required each federal agency to develop, document, and implement an agency-wide program to provide information security for the information that is available. Let's see, ISO. ISO is the largest developer of and publisher of international standards. ISO is not associated with any government entity, but works with public and private sectors. Approximately 18,000 standards have been established. The ISO 9001 is quality. ISO 3100 is risk management. ISO 2701 is information technology, and so on. ISO develops standards, and the standards are meant to be followed. So in ISO 9000, you're basically going to the standard tells you what you're going to be doing, but not how to do it. You put this information in on all the ISO standards. We have Internet Engineering Task Force. The Internet Engineering Task Force was formed in 1986, and it's the international organization that focuses on the Internet and its protocols. This includes transmission, the TCP/IP suite, the application layer, transportation layer, internet layer, and data link layer of the OSI module. This PCI Standards Council was developed in 2006 and managed for education and providing awareness of payment card industry. These standards include data security standards, payment applications, and so on. Center of Internet Security. Center of Internet Security is a non-profit, independent community of professionals that provide best practices, standards for secure configuration of network devices such as Apple iPhones, Checkpoint Firewall, Software, Cisco. Benchmarks detailed best practices, securing configuration, benchmark audit tools, and matrices. One of the goals of any procedure is to make it simple. Standards and everything that we just went over can get extremely complicated. Those standards have been established for credible organizations. The United States and international need to incorporate them into procedures in a way that's easy to follow. Policies need to be incorporate and expand. Converting policies to implementation requires multiple steps, and that's what we're going to go over. So let's take a look at the policy standard procedure guidelines. So a policy, the organization wants to implement a more defined password policy for access control policies. Not only does this include computer systems such as desktops and laptops, but servers that are maintained throughout the organization. The organization has determined that it wants to implement the standard and recommendations that NIST has established for special publication. The document provides all the recommended security controls that have to have it. The organization will use the standard and recommendations to follow what it needs. Storage, encrypt files that maintain passwords. Use operating systems. Access control features restrict access. Store the cryptograph hashes and passwords instead of storing passwords. Transmission, encrypt communications. Transmit cryptographic passwords. Use secure passwords. Use knowledge. Beware of non-technical passwords capturing such as shoulder surfing. Be aware of technical techniques. So these are things that are in the standard, the guidelines to follow. Then we create our procedures. These are the steps that the administration takes to implement control. In the examples, part of the procedures for implementation passwords is to identify all the systems that require passwords. Once they have been identified, it's necessary to apply the procedures to make them available. Then we create our guideline. These are the suggestions and best practices based on the standards regarding a password policy. For example, suppose the organization has decided to put this in place. Define guidelines that departments and businesses units can follow. So some basic guidelines we want to look at is possibly guidelines with optional actions, maybe for different policies, such as the thing, encrypt passwords, ensure secure communications are used, educate employees, lock out users if they have multiple attempts, require new passwords changing, require passwords length. These are some of the things we want to look at. Identity management and access control. So what is identity management? An important concept of information security professionals. It involves creating accounts for the users and all systems that they interact with, the coordinating those accounts so that they can change and reflect that. User behavior. Identify user application and network behaves. Helps create baselines of infrastructure by understanding normal behavior You can also detect when activities are not normal. For example, suppose the accounting employee named Scott originally accesses financial servers. This is considered normal behavior. It starts to begin accessing engineering servers. United Access is controlled is not working correctly, and we need to do that. We need to make sure that we change that. How often applications are accessed, who's accessing them, and what these are. These allow us to do it. And also, if you notice, and when you read the book, you can actually see what time people access it. So if someone's working 8 to 5 and they're accessing something at 2 o'clock in the morning, that should be a red flag, and there should be some bells and whistles that go off. So we want to make sure we monitor everything that's going on and look at that. If just collecting data, it doesn't help us. We need to monitor it and figure out everything that's going on with it. So it goes a lot more than that. Size and distribution of staff and assets. Creating a complete inventory of every IT access helps us implement what's going on. We can know where they are. We know versions that they've been updated. If there's updates, we need to do it. And this can be anything from an Excel spreadsheet to a database. But we want to make sure we know where our servers, routers, firewall, workstations, laptops, databases. The better we can control our inventory and have everything there, we can easily keep track of it to make sure it always has the latest information on it. Multi-layered access. Implementing multi-layers in a secure is providing a defense in depth mechanism and therefore a stronger protection. User access control. User access control profiles identify authorization, allowability of each user, such as what access is allowed and what is denied. You can implement user access control profiles and role-based access control. Implementing a role access-based act allows us to have this. System access control. Which users have access to the systems and what rights do they have once each access have it. So as you can see in the diagram, we can set up the accounting policies, what do they have, and this where software restriction policies, who has access to it. So it's just a different way of setting it up. We want to make sure that the 3 policies that we implemented are restricted. Enforcement enforces additional policies automatically, designated file types, and trusted publishers. Application access. Employees may be given full or limited amount of access to the systems and applications that access data. Applications may have direct control placed on them, such as limiting execution once it's launched. File and folder access. If users are not given access to certain application, access to the location of the data may be limited as well. Assigning controls to files, folders, and yet another layer of multi-layer structure. Limiting read and write access to the folders also is good. Data access. After passing through most of the layers of access control, limited access to the data itself is the last method of protecting it. A privileged, such as a read or write, is an example of security measures placed against data. As mentioned previously, many database applications, such as SQL, provide controls on that for us. Access control for employees and customers. Companies have many types of identity groups that we need to have access. Remote and virtual private networks, and especially with everything going on. Remote access. Virtual private networks are established to allow remote workers access to data that they need. The idea provides the same capabilities of off-site as if they were on-site. The VPN provides secure connection by creating encrypted tunnel from point A to B. It reduces costs by allowing the users at their location. It improves flexibility by giving users the ability to work, and it provides secure communication. Authentication methods incorporate multi-factor. We talked about that, and memberships in the group. And we have intranet, which is internal business communication. Intranet is for third parties, usually company directories. Internet is an internal private network, but it allows third parties to see that. Employees. I'm sorry, the intranet is for employees having like healthcare information on it, benefits on it that we don't want other people to see. It's not available on the internet and no one can get to it. Extranet is for third parties, and that allows us with our vendors so they can see their billing, they can see how much information they have. Supply chain, so these are some of the things that we want to look at. Now we obviously have secure business to business. E-commerce with site encryption allows us to have all the information available when we need to sell there, and we make sure the encryption process is in place. Secure online banking is another thing that we can look at. Federate third-party identities. We have best practices we can look at to help with the implementation process. Chapter summary. Understand the importance of access control and security policies is vital for every organization. Security is only as strong as the weakest link. If an employee feels that security measures are negatively affecting their job performance, they may find ways around it. You have to read the best practices for access control and how it benefits everyone in the organization. Whether implementation systems or access control, it allows everything to happen. Thank you. Have a good week.